prvního poprosím pana Jiřího Poláčka, který je ředitelem sekce centrální databáze katastru nemovitostí z Českého úřadu zeměměřického a katastrálního.
Děkuji, dobré odpoledne, dámy a pánové. Jsem zodpovědný za sekci, která má na starosti provoz centrálních databází, správu dat a služby uživatelům a budu hovořit o prostorových otevřených datech, respektive spíš o službách nad nimi. Bude se to týkat samozřejmě dat katastru nemovitostí, takže jenom stručně o katastru nemovitostí. On je otevřený u nás už od samého vzniku, velmi otevřený od roku 1817, kdy vlastně vzniknul a ta specifika spočívá v tom, že od roku 2001 máme centrální databázi, která je online napojená na jednotlivé katastrální pracoviště, takže jsme schopni poskytovat celou řadu online služeb a aplikací, z nichž některé jsou otevřeností významné. Zejména asi vám známe nahlížení do katastru nemovitostí. A druhý moment důležitý přišel v roce 2012 spuštěním základního registru územní identifikace adres a nemovitostí, neboli zkratkou RUJAN. Tenhle projekt byl spolufinancován ze zdrojů Evropské unie. Takže pojďme se podívat na takové milníky otevřenosti v roce 2004 aplikace nahlížení do katastru. Prosím vás, zdvihněte ruku, kdo jste nikdy neviděl nahlížení do katastru. Děkuju, už se mi dlouho nestalo, že mi někdo zdvihnul ruku. Tak od roku 2007 potom vešla v platnost směrnice Inspire a následně jsme zavedli vlastně volné prohlížecí neboli webmap services služby pro katastrální mapu, napojili mapu do aplikace nahlížení a třetí takový milník RUJAN s otevřenými daty pro celou řadu témat, minimálně pro ty inspirovské parcely, budovy, adresy a administrativní členění, čili klíčová otevřená geodata a současně, protože ta data jsou prostřednictvím RUJAN k dispozici zdarma, tak jsme i ty služby inspirovské zavedli, ty stahovací služby jako otevřené. Takže směrnice Inspire je významná v tom, že zavádí volné vyhledávací, to znamená také ty katalogové služby a prohlížecí služby, zatímco RUJAN přinesl otevřená data a s tím i otevřené stahovací služby. Takže tady jsou nějaké příklady dnes volně dostupných prohlížecích služeb. Ty nejvíce zatížené, nejvíce používané samozřejmě katastrální mapa, respektive parcely a další, a ortofotomapa. A já bych teď prosil pustit krátké video, jak se ukázalo, že to video běží tady déle než u mě na počítači, takže možná o minutku těch 6 minut přetáhnu a mi to odpustíte určitě. Tohleto video je 4 roky staré. Ty služby už jsou minimálně 4 roky k dispozici, některé déle. A to, co je na tom podstatné, je, že se na tom krásně vysvětluje princip interoperability. Vy prostě začnete s nějakým dialogem, kde je nejdůležitější vložit IP adresu té volné služby a nastavit nějaké parametry komunikace. A pak už si jenom zvolíte, jaká data chcete vidět. Teď podstatná otázka, kde najdu tu adresu IP služby. No, půjdu na evropský geoportál Inspire nebo na národní Inspire geoportál a pomocí těch katalogových služeb prostřednictvím klíčových slov, katastrální mapa a podobně si najdu ty IP adresy a potom už vidím katastrální mapu, můžu tam vidět i parcelní čísla budovy a to, co teď vidíte, je mapová kompozice ze 3 takových zdrojů. Záplavové území z Výzkumného ústavu vodohospodářského, ortofoto ze Zeměměřického úřadu a katastrální mapa z našeho úřadu. Vidíte, že v okolí hotelu Termál v Karlových Varech, kde je to situováno, ani stoletá voda řeky teplé nám Termál nezapraví, zatímco v jiné části v Tašovicích tam ta ohře záplavou hrozí. Takže vězte, že kdybyste potřebovali pro sebe nebo pro známé zjistit, zda ta vaše nemovitost nebo ta nemovitost, kterou chcete zakoupit, je v záplavovém území, tak tyhle služby už jsou k dispozici dávno a zdarma. Tak děkuju, budeme pokračovat prezentací. Ano, půjdeme teda na ty nebo dál jsou k dispozici samozřejmě ty volné stahovací služby. Tady tu zkušenost budete mít k dispozici ke stažení ty prezentace, takže já už nebudu zdržovat se zkušenostmi a s překážkami, jenom bych chtěl říct, že aplikace nahlížení je od samého vzniku nejčastěji navštěvovanou webovou stránkou v České republice. V lednu tohoto roku jsme měli 2,8 milionu návštěv za jeden měsíc. Takhle nám rostou požadavky na služby, takhle nám rostou požadavky na stahování otevřených dat. A jenom na závěr takovou malou úvahu. Tady se hovoří stále o otevřených datech, ale je třeba si uvědomit, že když si stáhnete 18 milionů parcel a 5 milionů budov z České republiky, tak k tomu potřebujete nějaké zázemí, byť ta data jsou otevřená. Takže zajímavou alternativou je právě použít ty služby, které vám také přinášejí data, protože i ty prohlížecí služby mají implementované funkce typu Get Feature Info. Stahovací služby přinášejí data, byť v omezeném rozsahu, ale skutečně jako otevřená data a hlavně online. Takže závěrem bych chtěl říct, a myslím, že jsem to skoro stihnul, že Rujan přinesl významná otevřená prostorová data, které jsou skutečně rozsáhle využívána, ale ten Inspire k tomu přidal ještě něco navíc, zúročil vlastně mnohaletý proces standardizace v oblasti těch prostorových dat. Takže nejen, že jsou ta data poskytována ve standardní podobě, ale i ty služby nad tím je možné vybudovat ve standardní podobě. Takže velmi snadno můžete prostřednictvím i volného softwaru použít ty služby a ty mají jednu obrovskou výhodu. Jsou online, takže jsou k dispozici nejen pro nějaké rozsáhlé analýzy, jak jsou spíš ta data vhodná, ale pro rozhodovací proces. Děkuji za pozornost.
Děkujeme panu Poláčkovi. Pokud je nějaká otázka, tak se klidně osmělte hned, protože druhé téma bude trochu jiné zase. Má někdo něco? Vypadá to, že ne, takže můžeme postoupit dál a poprosím Eleanor Stewart, ředitelku sekce pro transparentnost z Ministerstva zahraničních věcí Velké Británie. Good afternoon, Eleanor.
Hi. Okay, before I start, can I just ask if anybody's here from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Good, excellent. It's only my own colleagues I need to worry about then. Okay, I'm from the UK Foreign Office and I'm head of transparency, and I think it would be helpful to share with you the journey that the Foreign Office has been on with regard to open data and transparency. As Andrew said this morning, and I'm sure Sue mentioned as well, the UK journey into transparency and open data started around 2008-2009. And Prime Minister set out a lot of commitments in 2010. So by 2012, this is exactly where the Foreign Office were. We had generally decided it wasn't really anything to do with us because we were special, because Foreign Affairs ministries generally are very special. We hadn't published any open data, and no one knew really what open data was, and they weren't actually that interested. However, in 2013, we were becoming chair of the G8 and chair of the Open Government Partnership, and suddenly it occurred to us that maybe we should know what it was all about, not least so that we were a bit more informed and capable of standing up with some credibility and hosting events like this and telling everybody else around the world what it was. So we recognised that there was a big cultural change that needed to go on, and I, having been in the Cabinet Office, thought I fancy a challenge and moved to the Foreign Office. I didn't quite realise what the challenge was at the time. So the Foreign Secretary acknowledged this, and we made a big move towards it. So the first issue we had was to try and play catch-up on the Prime Ministerial commitments that were mentioned earlier on from 2010. And if you have a look at them, you'll notice that some of them are actually quite straightforward, and some of them are actually very, very challenging. And whilst we are now meeting all of them, to some degree or other, we have some serious issues with some of them, particularly around being open in what we're buying in our procurement. Because you'll imagine buying things in 174 countries is a lot of translation of contracts and explaining around the world what transparency is and the terms and conditions on which we're buying things. So it's not easy, and we're not finding it straightforward at all. However, we are now in a position where we're being much more open. We're meeting all of those commitments. But in addition to that, we're being completely open about the aid that we provide around the world, and we're publishing that in a reusable format, along with some of the project documentation. All of the service delivery standards for our consular services are now published against number of cases, type of case, and where in the world that those services have been accessed. We have details of our posts around the world. We have our online travel alerts that are published as a real-time feed. And we are, or have recently just published an inventory of everything we have in our archive, which is quite impressive if you think of the age of the UK and the size of what that's liable to be. And we've done that in spite of the legal challenges that we've had, particularly in areas or from settlers in Kenya and things around some of the Mau Mau rebellion and areas like that. We've still done it. But we're not perfect, and we've got a long way to go. And there's a couple of other areas that we're still working on. As you can see, 4 of my top 10 that I'm working on are listed there as the gifts data, which are the gifts diplomats get given anywhere in the world, which is difficult. Some human rights information, which will cause international and departmental sensitivities to open up. And a particular domestic bugbear, which is what's in the government wine cellar, which has been classified for many, many years and hopefully is no longer going to be a state secret. But you never know, because that's what the UK government does, is just drink its wine all the time. However, having got all of that data out there to a relatively decent standard, and I'm sure Richard will cover proper standards more in detail later on, because we as a department were so slow in releasing data, we'd sort of missed the curve in people using our data, and we weren't really sure what kind of data people wanted from us. So we decided to have a hack day, which was an interesting experience for a group of people that generally spend their lives in suits and don't really like working weekends. But hey, we got a bunch of 20 or 30 developers into a room, most of them teenagers, most of them making us feel very, very old, and let them play with the data we'd released. And you can watch it if you would like to, but what was interesting is what they produced. So that is just a snapshot of an alert service, which is an Android device built in the 24 hours that the hack day went on, which takes our live feed of travel advice. And if somebody has subscribed to it through their Android phone, they can get that as an alert if there's a change or a new alert for that region. Particularly useful in areas like the Philippines during Hurricane Haiyan, or other civil emergencies elsewhere, where it's trying to find out what's access to consular services, what's the best thing to do, how do British citizens stay safe. Another thing that was built was something called This Is Not a Travel API, which tried to consolidate a lot of information about countries for British travellers that businesses could use and aggregate for business travel to improve how we work overseas and the safety of those citizens that work overseas and things like that. It's very successful. The next one was particularly interesting, and the idea behind this application was to track the UK's quality of the relationships diplomatically around the world using different indices based on our data. And if you're quite observant, it tracks it from red being bad to green being good. And you'll notice that, according to this application, we are at war with Greenland. We're not. It's an indication of how bad the data that we put into that system is. And that's actually based on the number of treaties we've signed with a particular country. And we haven't signed any treaties with Greenland. So, obviously, using that as the only index, we have a a bad relationship with them. But the premise behind the application is good. It's about monitoring the value for money we're getting into our diplomatic efforts and work overseas and how we're doing that. And that's something very important to make us accountable to the UK taxpayer and justify what the Foreign Office actually does. And the final thing that we awarded a prize to at this Hack Day was something Andrew mentioned earlier on, which was a presentation on the usability or not of the data that the FCO has produced. And I will be perfectly frank and say it was quite painful to listen to some of that, having spent 18 months working very hard to release data and get the Foreign Office on board doing that. But all of the points that the chap made were perfectly valid. There was things about our fields not being consistent, different types of terminology for the same items. And if we don't take that on board, it would be very easy to go, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's our area, we know better. But actually, whilst it was painful, it was worth listening to, and it is important we take the feedback on board to improve the quality of what we're producing to make it usable. But as I said, we're nowhere near there. That was about 4 weeks ago, I think, the Hack Day and that presentation, and I'm still working through some of the simpler errors in there. But what are we trying to do next? Well, I've just said, we're trying to improve the quality of what we're putting out there. We're trying to improve ownership within our department of that data so that anything that is released is seen as belonging to the person that produced it, not to the person that published it. And that is fundamental, and that's a change in the culture where traditionally, if something went into the public domain, it belonged to the press office. Well, actually, no, it belongs to the person that's generated that piece of data, and it's up to them to take ownership of it and be responsible for the security or otherwise of it. We're obviously trying to release more data, and we're trying to encourage lots of people to use the data that we're releasing. So that's really where we're going. But in doing that, I think I'd like to share with you some of the lessons we've learned, which are that it is a challenging thing to do. It's not easy, can be painful. People will throw stones at you. Journalists will write nasty things about you. And it's certainly not easy to get your colleagues to agree to release information. But it can also be fun. It helps everybody, so it helps the British citizen. It actually helps the Foreign Office achieve its wider objectives and serve citizens better. So it is worth it, and it's a very good thing to do, and it's just about making things happen and getting on with it. And I think that's one of the messages Andrew gave us earlier on as well. That's it. Thanks.